Adelante, adelante.
Pronto.
Lars Jonung is emeritus professor of the University of Lund, is an economist who has centered most of his work in monetary and fiscal policies. In particular, he has experience in monetary unions or, sorry, Franco, ¿qué dijo?
No. No.
Okay, do you hear me anyway?
I hear you.
Okay, he has, as I said, accumulated experience on the matters of doing away with the national currency or joining a monetary union or keeping your currency in several countries in Europe. This sounds very important, very relevant, in particular to Argentina. But since Argentina is a case in itself, he simply, that my suggestion maybe, decided to look at the monetary system of Uruguay. He has already been in Uruguay twice, and once he delivered a lecture in Art University in which he precisely expressed each of the robust reasons Sweden had at that time not to join the euro. Lars, I think this is as much an introduction as you will get. We are very happy to have you here. And from now on, it's your turn. Tack så mycket.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and see me. And I wish I was in Uruguay now, and I wish I could speak Spanish, but unfortunately I cannot. My background is the following one. I have been advisor to can you see the slide? Can you see?
I see your slides. I
Good.
didn't see your face, but I sort of know by heart.
Yeah. I have worked on the monetary systems of Estonia in 1992, when Estonia became a new country, and the choice was what kind of monetary system should Estonia adopt. I also took part in a study commissioned by the government of Iceland concerning the Icelandic currency system. And in both cases, we recommended currency boards. I also worked as research advisor at the European Commission in Brussels for 10 years, and here my focus was on the euro. So my specialty is the euro and currency boards, but I also taken part in the debate in Sweden about inflation targeting and how to develop a system based on inflation targeting. And my background is also that I've been interested in the history of monetary unions. And history, I would claim, is an excellent guide for the choice of the proper monetary system for any country. And basically, you have a smorgasbord, a menu of 3 monetary options for Uruguay. First of all, a truly fixed exchange rate arrangements. Under this heading, you could have a monetary union with a common currency, like the US dollar and the euro. You can have dollarization or euroization, and you have the case of Ecuador, Panama, Montenegro, Monaco, and Andorra. And perhaps your neighbor Argentina will have the dollar as well. Then you have the case of specie standards, the gold standard, the silver standard, and you have currency boards like Hong Kong, Estonia, and Bulgaria. The second option is a fixed but adjustable exchange rate, a pegged rate. We know this from the Bretton Woods system, various currency baskets, the ERM system. And the third choice is a free national currency, a floating exchange rate. And here you have 2 cases, the rules-based systems, and there are 2 rules-based systems that has been very much in fashion. First of all, Knut Wicksel's rule of price stability, that is inflation is 0, or inflation targeting, where inflation generally is set as 2% a year. And then we have also the case of discretion-based monetary system, that is, systems have no rules at all. That's like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, hyperinflation, that we don't have any anchor for the monetary system. So the monetary options for Uruguay basically boils down to two: a truly fixed exchange rate arrangement, including no national currency or a currency board, or a floating exchange rate with rule-based frameworks. Because the political system has developed, so we will not accept the gold standard, and financial integration has made it very difficult to have pegged exchange rates. So when you now move to Uruguay, let me start by asking the question, does the size of the economy matter? And it's actually very important for the choice of monetary standards. Small countries, particularly microstates like Andorra and Monaco, they tend to adopt the currency of another country. They basically import the credibility of another currency, reducing transaction costs in this way. And big countries, they are so big, so they are monetarily independent. They want to have their currency of their own, like the United States, China, India, and I would say Europe. Now, how big is Uruguay? Well, Uruguay is in between, in the middle, like Sweden. They have a small open economy with an export to GDP ratio around 30%, a population a bit more than 3 million. We have a strong democratic tradition compared to the rest of Latin America. You're financially very open. Sweden is like Uruguay of Europe. We have a high export ratio. We have a population of around 10 million, high GDP capita, and strong democratic tradition. And we are, since the early 1990s, financially very open. So this suggests that a national currency is a viable option for Uruguay. Now, which are the lessons from Europe? I would like to discuss Uruguay from the Swedish European perspective, because I'm not an expert on Uruguay. Well, basically, you can have a monetary union like the euro area. You can have a currency board solution, or you can dollarize. Or if you do not accept a fixed exchange rate arrangement, you could have a floating exchange rate. And then under a floating exchange rate, inflation targeting is the main alternative today. So I'm going to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of these monetary systems. And let me start with the euro. The euro is unique. It's a gigantic experiment with no precedents in monetary history. We have had monetary unions in the past, but nothing like the euro, in the sense that a group of wealthy, independent nation states have handed over their monetary sovereignty, their monetary policy, to an independent central monetary authority, in this case, the ECB, the European Central Bank. Still, they maintain control on a national basis of fiscal policy. And this is a very interesting case. And the euro, it is an experiment. Let me show you the front cover of The Economist from the 1997. Here the architects of the euro area are working, while EMU, the Train de Grande Vitesse, it stands for European Monetary Union, is approaching. So it's this front cover shows the difference, or between those who are designing the system and the political pressure to bring about a common currency. And among the architects, among the people standing here, we have Bob Mandel. His theory about the optimum currency area, the OCA theory, has been very influential in the design of the euro. Basically, he says an optimal currency area is an area where the benefits of monetary integration, monetary unification, are higher than the costs. And the benefits we all know: lower transaction costs, more trade, more efficiency, dynamic effects. The costs are a loss of monetary independence, the loss of the ability to counter asymmetric shocks by a country of a currency of your own. And I had the pleasure to invite Bob Mandel for an interview I made in 2009. And he was at that time called Mr. Euro because of his intellectual influence on the Europeans. And he said the euro has been an unqualified success. Well, if you are the architect, you must be proud of your building. But he was too optimistic, I would say. Well, it's right that the euro has been successful. There are now 20 members of the euro area. You have them here on this map. And there are a few countries still standing, queuing to enter. And there are some countries that are not that interested in joining, like my own country, Sweden. So how has the euro evolved? For the first 20 years, it has a positive result. It managed to achieve price stability in countries like Greece or Italy or Spain, which have had a very high and volatile inflation. But there are also problems facing the euro. I would like to point out in particular two problems. Lack of fiscal discipline. We have a pact called the Stability and Growth Pact that was designed by the Germans in particular to keep fiscal government debt at a level below 60% of GDP and the budget deficit around less than 3% a year. That system has failed. The Europeans are now struggling how to cope with high volumes of government debt. And the other problem is a lack of supply side reforms. Many countries carry out a number of reforms in order to improve economic growth. But once into the euro, the interest of making reforms disappeared. They were hit by Maastricht fatigue, tired of making reforms. So that's the scorecard. I also like to stress another aspect that's unique with the euro. We have data on the popular support for the currency. I know of no other country in the world where you ask the public, what do you think about your currency? And the data shows, it's fascinating, that unemployment and inflation are driving the popularity of the euro. And this just shows the importance of carrying out successful economic policy in order to make a currency viable and sustainable. And here is a picture of Mario Draghi as the head of the ECB. And during the euro crisis in the early 2010s, he showed the political will to hold together the monetary union. And I would like to stress this as an important aspect. You have to have political will in the public to make a monetary union stable. So now this is the European background. As we move to Uruguay, is a monetary union an option for Uruguay? Well, first of all, is there a political will in Uruguay and its neighbors, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, Chile, to have a common currency? I doubt it. I would say no. The second question I ask is there an optimal currency area around Uruguay? Does Paraguay and Brazil form an optimal currency area? My guess is no. I think your economic systems are too, your industry, your economy, they are not that equal in order to make an OCA. And then my final question is, can fiscal policy among the members of a monetary union in South America be disciplined by any pact or agreement? Can you make it credible that if you join a monetary union with a common currency, that fiscal policy in Argentina will be the same as in Uruguay and Brazil? And I said, no, I doubt that, given your history. So history is a guide here. So then let's move to the option of dollarization. is this an option for Uruguay? Well, I would say that dollarization is an attractive option when the public has lost complete confidence in the national currency. If Uruguay is a case of severe monetary mismanagement, then credibility for your currency can only be accomplished by, say, introducing the euro. The question is, has Uruguay reached this point? Well, I doubt that. You have not had hyperinflation. You have a fairly stable rate of inflation, I would say. And dollarization is not an attractive option, in my view, viewing Uruguay from Sweden. And besides, looking upon the fiscal policy of the United States, I'm afraid that the United States and the dollar is up for some problems in the near future. Still, the US dollar is used as a unit of account and as a store of value in Uruguay. So you have already, to some extent, dollarized, but you've done it from a market view. So, is a currency board an option? Well, a currency board is a form of monetary union. It's an institution that issues notes and coins convertible into a foreign reserve currency at a fixed exchange rate. And as reserves, a currency board holds high-quality interest-bearing assets in the reserve currency, and it has to have 100% reserve backing. And the currency board has no discretion in monetary policy. Market forces determine the money supply. And the currency boards have been tried many times in economic history. As a rule, small countries have adopted currency boards. In Europe, Estonia and Lithuania had currency boards before they moved into the euro area. And Denmark has a very rigid exchange rate. They are like 50% like a currency board. And a currency board for Uruguay would give some advantages. You would immediately have the rate of inflation in the United States, and you would have the interest rates of the United States. There is one major drawback of a currency board. You give up all monetary independence. You cannot meet a sudden shock, domestic or foreign, by having a moving or floating exchange rate as an absorber. Still, you can absorb by using fiscal measures. You can use. Any question? Okay, I continue. So, the currency board is an interesting option, but perhaps the most interesting one is inflation targeting. Inflation targeting is now the dominant monetary system across the world. The big central banks, ECB, the Fed, Bank of England, target their inflation rates. And central banks in small open economies like Sweden, Norway, Canada, New Zealand are inflation targeters. And I would also like to include Uruguay there. Now, I'm talking to you from Lund, a small university town in Sweden. And Knut Wicksell is the father of inflation targeter. He published a book called Interest and Prices in 1898 in German. And he presented the idea underlying inflation targeting. That is, the central bank should have a target in terms of the development of prices, and the discount rate or the short-term policy rate should be the main instrument. And this is exactly what's going on today. The goal of inflation targeting is price stability, commonly defined as 2% rate of inflation, or as Knut wanted it, 2%. And the instrument is central bank policy, and the monetary framework or the monetary order is based on paper, an independent central bank, and free exchange rates, and unfettered free financial markets. So this is Wicksell's world. 100 years after his book, he has actually a bigger influence on the design of monetary policy than John Maynard Keynes or Milton Friedman or Woodford or anyone else. So this gives hope professors working at small universities across the world, perhaps they will manage to make an impact. So if we move to the next question, how is a scorecard of inflation targeting? Well, first of all, it has been successful. It has reduced consumer price inflation across the world. However, asset price inflation has been a problem ignored by many central banks. In particular in Sweden, we have 2% inflation measured by consumer prices, but 6, 7, 8% yearly asset price inflation. And this builds up financial imbalances that threatens financial stability. And the pandemic contributed to high inflation and probably an overreaction by central banks across the world by huge increases in the money supply. But still, inflation targeting is an interesting option for Uruguay. You should back it up with a strong institutional framework, an independent central bank, a proper fiscal framework. Sweden has a framework aiming at a government debt to GDP ratio around 35%. We are there, and you should have a proper financial stability framework. Then, does Uruguay have the necessary institutional framework for a successful monetary policy based on inflation targeting? My guess is yes. You have the size, you have the institutions, you have the tradition, you have your history. So I think the IT regime should be fostered or strengthened in Uruguay. You should have a constant debate in order to improve its working, and you should have currency competition. And currency competition, I'll come back to that on the next slide, is very important. Uruguay, I got this information from Isidoro recently. You have basically two currencies, two government-issued monies, the domestic Uruguayan peso and the foreign currency of that is the US dollar. And there is a market. There's a market for both of these monies. They compete, and the public decides the optimal or the efficient or the proper mix of the domestic and the foreign money. And more than 70% of bank deposits in Uruguay is dollar denominated. When I saw that number, I said, well, Uruguay you are dollarized already, but you still have your own currency. I think this puts pressure on the Central Bank of Uruguay to improve its performance, and it makes a conversion to a currency board more attractive in case the Uruguayan peso underperforms. So I would like to end by saying, let the best money win. I think that this is a perfect situation. Usually, if you look upon currency competition, you get into the huge literature of free banking and so on. Forget about that. Instead, this is not the question of competition between private monies, it's a competition between government monies. And that's an important point. So my conclusion is, an independent central bank based on inflation targeting or a currency board are the best options. And as long as the present inflation targeting remains successful, it should be maintained. The floating exchange rate of the peso can still isolate Uruguay from shocks, while the US dollar serves as the store of value. So let currency competition prevail. It allows the public of Uruguay to choose the money they prefer, and they don't need to listen to the advice of professors in economics in Uruguay or outside Uruguay. They make the choice. And my final conclusion is, what does Uruguay need? Well, it needs growth. Every country in Latin America, as well as in Europe, needs growth. The standard of living in Uruguay depends on high and sustainable economic growth. The choice of monetary system is important in the growth process by serving as a stable framework for the actions of the private sector. However, growth is ultimately based on efficient use of resources, that is, on supply-side reforms. And to carry out successful supply-side reforms, bringing out more competition, more openness, more trade, more of new firms, that is the key for the future. And such reforms should be given the highest priority to ensure a successful future for Uruguay, regardless of the choice of monetary system. So that's my presentation. I hope you have been able to follow it. And in case you're more interested, here's my resource portal at Lund University with all my work on monetary systems and monetary reforms. I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you very much, Lars. You have been very clear and very coherent in your presentation. Just let me underline that there was a link between Robert Bondel and Uruguay. In the 80s, he directed a program in the central bank trying to form economists at a high degree. And in 2000, he was received by the president of Uruguay at that time. So it's like you, he has at least twice visited Uruguay. I think we could ask all the audience to express their questions, but can I, as long as I have the floor, ask for one? Would the advice you gave at the beginning of the process of becoming an Euro country or not for Sweden, would those reasons be valid today?
Yes and no. When I discussed these issues in 1998, we didn't know how the euro was going to perform. And the first 10 years of the euro, they were very successful. After the crisis, the great financial crisis in 2008, 2009, suddenly the euro is running into problems. And in particular with Greece, the government of Greece had covered up the financial situation of Greece. And then we had enormous problem of keeping the growth of government debt at bay. And ECB ended up buying large amount of fiscal debt, which is also against the idea of an independent central bank. So today, it's a mixed picture. While the euro area has developed in some bad ways and some good ways, Sweden has also developed in some bad ways because we have actually followed ECB interest rate policy. So ECB and the euro is the elephant in the room in Sweden. So it doesn't matter very much. If you live very close to a giant, you have to follow the giant. So in a way, it doesn't matter very much if we are a member or not of the euro area. We follow the euro area. So we are in a way, not dollarized, but euroized. So there is a debate in Sweden, should we join or not? And I think we will have a number of government committees looking into it. We may join in the future, but it depends on the performance of the euro. And just now, the euro is not performing very convincingly.
Thank you, Lars. Ignacio, did you have a question?
Can you hear?
Yes.
Well, to start with, thank you very much, Professor, for the conference. More than a question, it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of a quandary, because this country, which has had dual currency or freedom of currencies, whatever you want to call it, has had a problem with that, and it's the overpricing of the peso, which is something that's very constant. The central bank has been unable to influence it, at least decisively, and there are a number of explanations for it, none of which, at least to me, and I'm a bit of a layman in these matters, is convincing. Why, if there's a free supply and demand, is the stronger of the two currencies cheaper than the weaker? with all the impact that that has on our economy. That's a bit the question, or the quandary that we're in.
Lars, before you answer, Ignacio was the Minister of Economics and Finance of Uruguay in the first half of the 90s.
Nobody's perfect.
Well, there's a standard answer to this question, which I'm just debating in Sweden. Why is the Swedish currency so weak to the euro? How do you explain it? And the only explanation you can say is that expectations matter. The expectations of the market participants, and the expectations are based on history. I do not know exactly the history that's behind these developments, but that's my standard answer. That you have to go into the history, and in case the history of the Uruguayan peso is a history of very large volatile fluctuations, then of course you try to stay away from it. You pay the price. You pay for the sins of the past, and you do that for a very, very long time. So I would say it's probably the case of original sin, but I must confess, this is not a satisfactory answer. I'm not happy with it.
Thank you.
We have a question from the audience. Let me fetch it here. The question is as follows. We do not have a fully independent central bank. In this case, can inflation targeting regime have a success?
It can make a sense, even if you don't have a fully independent central bank. And it's very difficult to create a fully independent central bank. It takes time. You have to have a history like Switzerland or Sweden, where you make the selection of the members of the central bank such that it's accepted by all the political parties and that you get the right people there. Still, you can have problems. We have had problems in Sweden. We had a central bank head for 17 years, and that was bad. You should have much shorter periods, and you should have also a set of, say, qualifications, merits for those who are on the central bank. In the case, for example, of Iceland, when we discussed setting up a currency board independent of the Icelandic political community, we suggested put foreign economists, people outside Iceland, on the board of on the currency board. You can do the same in Uruguay. Put someone from, say, England or Germany or Switzerland on the board of the Central Bank of Uruguay in order to create independence and credibility. You import it that way. That could be one solution. Ireland has done that. They put a Swede on the Central Bank board of Ireland.
Thank you, Lars. The audience keeps asking for more questions. One reads like this. How does a country like Uruguay deal with large fluctuations in real exchange rates?
You cannot deal, a central bank can only control nominal variables. It cannot control real variables. And these shocks are something you should allow the markets to handle. And the best way for a central bank to deal with them is to have a stable and low rate of growth in the money supply, in the volume of credit. So monetary policy is not a source of disturbances. But the real, you have to face it, you are a small open economy like Sweden. Suddenly the oil price changes, or the meat price changes, or the price of soybean changes. You cannot avoid that kind of disturbances. You basically have to have a system, economic system, as flexible as possible to handle the shocks you are subject to all the time. We have huge shocks in Sweden or in Europe with the war in Ukraine, with the energy prices doubling 4 or 5 times higher in a very short period. How do you deal with them? You cannot deal with them but just adjust to them in the short run.
Thank you. There's another question from the audience. Let's see. It's a little longer. In fact, it's two questions by the same participant. The first is, given the irresponsible fiscal and monetary policies in the US, what about cryptocurrencies? Bitcoin,
What about
cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Should Uruguay open doors to Bitcoin in the currency competition? I will read the second question afterwards. Please address this one.
First of all, I'm extremely critical of Bitcoins. It's just like a Ponzi scheme. It's very dangerous. There is no, it's a system that's backed by nothing. And I wish that Sweden could be the first country simply prohibiting it. You can't prohibit it, but you have to inform the public about the dangers of Bitcoin. It's an enormous, first we had gold. To dig up gold, it takes a lot of resources. To create Bitcoins take a lot of resources. It's so much better that the national governments are the producers of legal tender. Bitcoin will never be legal tender. And it's a money supplied by the gray or the black sector. And those who are acting there are not the kind of people you should try to interact with. So I'm extremely critical of Bitcoin. I think it's something that is a dead end. Even worse than that, it's destructive. So I wish Uruguay could be the first country to prohibit it.
Thank you. Personally, I prefer information to prohibition, but that's for whatever it's worth. It's my own opinion. I have to read the second question from the same participant, and he says about bank reserve rates. Uruguay has similar reserve rates for dollars and pesos. Should it be biased in favor of pesos, given high dollar savings denomination?
That was an interesting question. I don't have the answer. I would leave that to the market. It's a choice that the commercial bank should make. However, from a financial stability perspective, much suggests that commercial banks are undercapitalized across the whole Western world. We have studies from the United States where you're suggesting that you should have at least 20 to 25% reserve ratios. That's a high ratio compared to what you probably have today in Uruguay. And I'm inclined to have high ratios in order to maintain a financially stable banking system. That's my answer, but it's not very, very instructive, I'm afraid.
Coming from you, it is instructive. We still have another question from the audience. And then, of course, the floor is open for everybody who would like to have comments, questions, suggestions. Let me read this one. There are two ways to carry out monetary policy. Fix the instant interest rate or fix the amount of money. Uruguay does not have a capital market. The banking market is highly concentrated, and Uruguay is not characterized by having an accompanying fiscal policy. For you, with a market of these characteristics, you said in some way that growth is the answer. With a fiscal policy like Uruguay has in such a relatively small country, what would its monetary recipe be?
Well, I'm very much in favor of a debt to GDP, national debt to GDP ratio of around 30%. We have had we have been suffering in Sweden from the belief that fiscal policy could stabilize the economy. And we have learned through our history that fiscal policy generally destabilizes the economy. We should be extremely careful by using fiscal policy to stabilize the business cycle. We have automatic stabilizers working, but discretionary fiscal policy is not something I would recommend. And in case you have problems with maintaining stability in your country, like Uruguay, you should not give the policymakers or the politicians too much power in their hands. They would just hurt themselves and hurt your country. So instead, if you want to copy a European country, copy Switzerland, the richest country in the world with a very strong currency. You could be the Switzerland of Latin America. It just depends on the institutions you establish and you maintain. It's easy to say, but it takes generations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lars. It would be going back to our past when at some times, and not for these reasons necessarily, we were dubbed the Switzerland of Latin America. It was never true, but it was. May I inject a question of my own, because I have no other questions from the audience so far. The overvaluation of the Uruguayan currency, mentioned first by Ignacio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, in my view, also an issue of Uruguay exporting confidence. Given, of course, the immediate neighborhood. I'm not talking we are exporting confidence to Sweden, but in the context of, say, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, Uruguay sounds or is more stable, and therefore that moves a little bit of the portfolio of people, Argentina, Brazil, to Uruguayan shores, and in some cases to Uruguayan pesos. It's mostly, when they come to Uruguayan shores, I would say is real estate, is buying debt, public debt, but it is also in part buying pesos and depositing. And this is what I, for lack of another way of describing it, I say Uruguay exports confidence, and that overvalues its currency. Does it make any sense?
Yes, I recognize the story. This is your comparative advantage, stability. It's just like Switzerland or Denmark. You have a pressure on your currency because you're surrounded by neighbors who are more unstable than you. And you should accept this, and you should profit from it. You should just sell yourself as this is the Switzerland of South America, or the Florida of South America without DeSantis. You should look upon this as an advantage, that you could create I would say, a positive cumulative circuit process. Use it, and just don't try to stop it. And first of all, don't try to don't tell your central bank to control your exchange rate. Let the exchange rate be a free price, because that's a very important price signal. You need that into your economy. So I'm happy to hear that your currency is overvalued. It promises a better future for Uruguay than for your neighbors. Then you can also discuss, like in Switzerland, who could buy property in Uruguay. I mean, if my daughter bought an apartment in Verbier in Switzerland, and there are all kinds of rules that we try to at least keep some parts of Switzerland for the Swiss. And you can adjust your overvalued exchange rate by that kind of measures outside the standard measures of economic policy.
Okay, I am, I am a bit sad that I had the insight in the right direction. And the problem is we have those who are producing exportable goods and those who are producing import substituting goods. They are suffering because of the overvaluing of our currency. It is not all negative.
Yeah.
Thanks to this export of confidence, when things got very bad in Argentina, we received an influx of capital, yes, but also of productive technology that transformed Uruguayan agriculture, let's say around 2010 or those years. There was, if you want, part of this overvaluation was compensated by the fact that we, from then onwards, had a more productive agricultural system.
Yeah.
They taught us those systems by voting with their feet. They were agriculture farmers, say in Argentina, that moved to Uruguay and brought a different way of production in agriculture. So I'm sad, but I know it has advantage. It has advantage.
I mean, this is the same case as Switzerland, because Switzerland, due to an appreciating currency, has all the time improved the productivity and the performance of its export industry. Swatches, watches, Airbnb, and so on, they are getting better and better as a result of the exchange rate policy. And this is a problem for the Swedish industry, because our currency has been undervalued in the sense that we have had a rising euro, say falling krona value. And this has implied that a number of ghost firms and companies have been able to survive in Sweden. We don't have the pressure through the exchange rate to improve our productivity. So there's an interesting case here about how to adjust the domestic economy so you can benefit from an overvaluation of your currency. And if you do that successfully, it will promise to give Uruguay a high GDP per capita, a high standard of living.
Well, has this exchange of views made you reflect on other new comments or suggestions or questions to Lars?
Yes, I have a question related to this, that we have a difference with Switzerland in the sense that Switzerland is a highly industrialized economy, and we are a commodity country that produces commodities which are so volatile. And usually it generates imbalance in our current account and their financial account. How this affect the choices in terms of how monetary regime we can choose?
Well, your question reminds me of Iceland. Iceland was once the cod economy, that is, the volume of cod fish harvested decided the exchange rate. And now Iceland has moved more and more away from the cod period, having more diversified system. And in the short run, I see there are problems because some sectors will be hurt by a strong currency policy. I agree with you. But on the other hand, if you have a flexible economy, this should be a challenge that can be the economy can take care of, improving and diversifying in various ways. You may have to have some temporary support for farmers being hurt or hit by what's happening with the exchange rate, but still you should keep on allowing for adjustment in the economy to the exchange rate. That is, in the long run, the most promising way. It's so easy to fall back to say, more populist measures like tariffs, temporary restrictions on trade, and so on, but they are not, in the long run, worth the price.
Can I abuse of my role and pose at least a comment to what Juan Manuel has just said? When we say we are commodity exporters, we are somehow limited in our appreciation, because a ton of bovine meat today has exactly the same customs number than it had 20 years ago. But the production function, of meat today is Uruguayan meat today is different from Uruguayan meat, say, 20 years ago. It embeds in beef, Uruguay exports, sanitary, genetic, and even information technology services that are included in the package. You do not see them, but that makes it different from the composition of a ton of beef 20 or 40 or 60 years ago. So we are, in a way, while exporting commodities, exporting also part of Uruguayan talent.
Okay.
And second, there is another universe, smaller but not negligible, of exports that are services, global services, from BPO to, all kinds of services, and including logistical services, which are linked to the history and the geography of Uruguay. We were a country of transit trade for 500 years ago, I'm sorry. So we are a commodity exporting country with commodities that are embedded with other elements, and we are also a services, period, exporting country. I think that the exports of services at this time are a little under half of the exports of goods, but somebody may have the right ratio. And this are two small qualifications to what Juan Manuel just said.
Concerning the export or import of services, why don't Uruguay open up for Europeans to move to Uruguay in the wintertime and have connections with IT? Like Madeira and Bilbao in Spain offer a technology basis or platforms that make it easier for North Europeans to come and work with the new technology, hooked up to the rest of the world. You probably have a comparative advantage, a stable country, no fighting in the streets, and good food. I would expect that could be quite something for both Americans and Europeans to look into.
Okay. Uruguay has moved in that direction, but I have the impression, I have no figures, statistical figures, I have the impression our Europeans are in fact Argentinians that have moved I think the CEOs and personnel of two of the largest unicorns in Argentina are based in Uruguay. Somebody might correct this appreciation, but I think it's a case for at least two of the unicorns, Argentinian unicorns, setting up in Uruguay. So we have moved in that direction. Perhaps we should do it more and diversify it more.
Just allow
Any
the
more
markets to work. I mean, that's the most important thing. Then you get the adjustments. You cannot plan it centrally. You cannot figure it out in the Ministry of Finance, what to do. You should allow the experimental approach. That is the most promising. Sweden is doing it now, and we're very successful in IT.
encouraging. Any more questions, please? If it's not the case, then I believe we should give Lars a clap and tell him you're welcome as a corresponding member of the Uruguayan Academy of Economics. We shall be sent you the document in shortly. And this presentation you made will be in the web of the Academy shortly. Thanks again. Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket, and thank you for listening to me. I hope I said something that's new for you. And I hope someday to come to Uruguay again.
Very good. You will
Thank you, Lars.
always be welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lars.
Thank you.
We keep waiting for you.
Okay.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Marisa. Usted ha sido el poder detrás del trono en todo esto. Muchísimas gracias por ayer, que tuvo bastante tiempo para esto. Y bueno. Say hey to Christina.
I'll do that. I'm so happy that the link finally worked. What a mess.
I hope so.
Every time I've been connected with the United States or England or Latin America, there's always a problem. But it worked finally.
Okay.
Good. Pocho,
Okay,
let's be
Well-
in touch. Send me the link.
I'm sorry.
Send me the link so I can put it on my resource portal.
Marisa, usted le puede mandar el vínculo de la presentación que cuando está subida a la web.
Sí, por supuesto. Ya hoy en la tarde
Gracias.
tratamos de subirlo y tiene que entrar en la web de la academia.
Okay, you will be receiving the link
Thank
by
you.
Marisa.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all the best. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hello.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to me. It's a pleasure.